Hi everyone, and welcome to, I think, the fourth webinar. Sorry for the delay this morning. So today we're going to be talking about salivary hormone testing, functional pathology salivary hormone testing. And again, like it always is, this is aimed at naturopaths and nutritionists who want to know more and feel a bit more confident in interpreting their results and checking out their results for their clients to empower their clients with the numbers. So today I'm going to talk about salivary hormones, and there's two different types of hormone testing that we can do. One is blood, and it's serum. So it's the fluid with which your blood sits in, and those hormones are the ones that are circulating based on what's being expressed by your getting out of your ovaries and what's wandering around in your system. And salivary hormones are generally thought of as the hormones that are actually stored within your tissues. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and functional pathology laboratories do it for about $140. And if you get the adrenal ones in there as well, the cortisol, 4 times a day cortisol, then it costs around $200. So I'm just going to pop on the let's have a look. Pop on the presentation this morning. Alrighty. So today, we're going to talk about salivary hormones. And salivary hormones are a really fantastic way of empowering, especially females, with what's going on with their hormones. And just like I have the past couple of webinars, what I'm going to be doing is making sure that you understand a way of describing to your clients how this is useful for them and how this works in their system, and then a way of having a look at all of the different numbers. So this is how I explain it to my clients. This is literally the piece of paper that I use to explain it, and the biggest thing that I find is it's empowering for people to understand, and for my clients and females in particular, to understand what's going on with their bodies. And it's not something you get taught at school. So we kind of take it for granted because we study it in college and at university, and it's just not something that they're going to necessarily be able to do. So the biggest thing for me to explain to them is around ovaries and your ovarian hormones. So the first 2 weeks of your cycle, and this is how I describe it to them, the first 2 weeks of your cycle is all about getting out there and being quite out there and extroverted and getting stuff done. It's because you get a big wave of estrogen in the form of estradiol. Estradiol is one of 3 different estrogens, and the 2 other different estrogens are actually pro-inflammatory depending on their conditions, but they can be pro-inflammatory. So we get a normal stock standard estrogen called estradiol, and it comes out and it makes you quite out there and expressive and getting stuff done. Then ovulation kind of hits, and ovulation hits because of the difference between the estradiol and the progesterone. So the further they get apart, the more likely it is that ovulation will kick off and FSH and LH will kick off to release the egg. Then you get the second wave of progesterone. And progesterone is the hormone that looks after kind of going inside your cave. It's protective, it nourishes and looks after you. And it's the one that's there so that the endometrial tissue can be as nice and thick and as wonderful just in case you do fall pregnant. And that's why progesterone kind of hangs out, so it's protective. The problem is when it comes to PMS and all those other types of things, is that progesterone gets pushed because your body's trying to be in this protective kind of mode, looking after yourself, and society and the rest of the world knows you from the last 2 weeks where you were out there doing everything, being superhuman, supermum, superwoman, and expecting you to continue that way. And the clash comes where there's a discrepancy between the two. So depending on the type of condition, I'll then go into talking to them about the endometrial lining. So if it's endometriosis, we talk about the thickening of the lining. If it's adenomyosis, we talk about how it happens within the tissue just below the endometrium. If it's PCOS, we talk about the ovaries a bit more and the follicles and how that works, and if there's excess estrogen, which is pro-inflammatory and kind of hangs around. And we also talk about FSH and LH when we're talking to fertility clients. So next, we've got the steroid hormone pathway. And this comes in handy when I'm speaking to people about their results. And I'll go through 2 cases after this. The steroid hormone pathway, and this is literally the one that came out of the Health Scope Pathology book, is it starts with cholesterol. So if anyone's on cholesterol medication, we need to make sure that they understand that all of their hormones are coming from cholesterol. And if they're minimizing their cholesterol, then they're minimizing their ability to create more hormones as well. I find perimenopausal women on Lipitor start to have problems because they're not creating or not sustaining the hormones that are inside them. That makes pregnenolone, and pregnenolone makes everything. And as we're going down there, the mineral corticoids is the first grey box there, and it's got aldosterone. It looks after your blood pressure. So often when I'm talking to people about their adrenal hormones, I'll talk to them about orthostatic hypotension and blood pressure issues. Next, there's your cortisol and your corticosteroids. So cortisol is one of the ones that we definitely want to talk about when it comes to adrenals. And cortisol is made from progesterone, or it's dragged out from progesterone. So when there's high stress, progesterone can come down because it's being used up. The next one along there has DHEA in it, and DHEA is another really amazing hormone that makes that downflows into testosterone and the estrogens, but it also responds very quickly to stress. So I often talk about that with people's results as well. Further on from DHEA is testosterone, and all of the estrogens come from testosterone as well. Given certain environments, the E1 and E3 estrone and those 2 estrogens are pro-inflammatory. So under stressful conditions, they can be pro-inflammatory, and inflammation is defined by heat, pain, tenderness, swelling, bloating. And they're all the types of things that a lot of my clients have just before their periods, during their periods, or only for a couple of days after, or maybe even the 2 weeks leading up to. The problem there is if we're storing excess estrogens, and like it says down the bottom there, estrogen metabolism is dependent on the cytochrome P450 pathways, and it's dependent on COMT as well, which are detoxification pathways to get out of your system. So if those pathways aren't working with storing those pro-inflammatory estrogens, we start to have problems when it comes to bloating, pain, tenderness, swelling, and heat. So that's how we explain those bits. Case 1. Okay, so this is a 27-year-old female, and she came with a history of diagnosis of PCOS, and she wanted to get a hold of why her periods had been out for quite some time. They were very delayed. They were 6 weeks long. And she presented as somebody who was really quite high tensile. She was really busy, business owner, always on top of things, always wanted to get things right, bit of a perfectionist. And she wanted to get her cycles back on track so that she could fall pregnant. So as you can see, this is again from Health Scope, that her pathology results show that the 3 different types of estrogens, so we've got E1 and E3 there, estrone and estradiol, and E2. E2 is just your normal estrogen. You can get that done with your serum, but doctors won't do E1 and E3 because it doesn't necessarily pertain to pathology. But it's in that grey zone that we've talked about before. It's not in the black zone, it's not in the white zone, not everything's fine, but it's in that grey zone. Then you've got progesterone, and underneath there's testosterone, and we've got DHEA, and I always get DHEA done because it can drive those high testosterones and high estrogens because it's the precursor to it. And if we're getting DHEA done, it's always a good idea to get cortisol done, because if DHEA is high, it could be high for multiple reasons, but the vast majority of the time, if you get cortisol done, you'll notice that their stress is actually high. So it's actually the cortisol that's causing the cortisol is a really good indicator that your stress ores are up, and then your DHEA will go up, and then we'll end up having a flow-on effect for testosterone and estrone. So these numbers by themselves clearly aren't useful, except for the red dots next to them, and you can tell that they're out of whack. That DHEA is extraordinarily high, and the highest the machine will go to read that is about 35, and she's at 25.7. The cortisol we'll talk about a little bit more in depth later on. I just wanted to more focus on the female hormone profiles today, because next week we'll do adrenal hormone profiles. So this is the next page that tells you about the reference ranges. So you can see in the salivary hormone optimized reference ranges for the female, E1, the highest it should be in any part of the cycle, is 95. If we go back here, hers is 116. So you can see that her E1 is high. E2, the highest it needs to go is about 17, and she did this on day 21, so it should be in the luteal phase, and hers is 10, so that's perfect. E3, pro-inflammatory under certain conditions, and she came across as a stressful person. The highest it should be is 112. If we go back, hers is 63, so that's great, but her estrone, the sterones, so testosterone and estrone, are quite high. So if we look on testosterone, the highest it should be is 137 at any point in time for a female, and hers is 305. So that's double. She's showing signs of hirsutism as well, and when she went and got her blood test done after this, because we wanted to check whether or not her FSH and LH were working, she was ovulating, but she was ovulating very, very late. So then her DHEA is obviously out of reference range because it's red. Her progesterone, this is the thing, often we think there's 4 different types of PCOS. One of the best books on periods is, well, there's 2 really amazing books on periods. One of them is the Period Repair Manual by Lara Bryden, and so you can go to larabryden.com, and she's another naturopath here in Australia, and she's written a fantastic book called the Period Repair Manual. And the other one's Ruth Tricky's book that you've probably all seen as a textbook for your colleges and your universities. So within those, you can tell that the idea is you're either having the types of symptoms that you'd see in high estrogen is often the types of symptoms you would see in low progesterone. So doing this really gives you an obvious change between the two, which is fantastic. Obvious discrepancy between the two, so you can see which ones is actually causing the problem. And as you can see, her progesterone is 326, and you want it to be around about the 300 to 1,000. So, sorry. Then we've got the cortisol, and we're going to go into this a little bit more in depth next webinar. So cortisol is usually, I'll show you the trend there. Cortisol is usually relatively high in the mornings, and we want it to be nice and high to be hungry and wide awake. And when it's not, and when our cortisol dips, or it's, say, in this case, in this woman's case, it's half, she was waking up tired, couldn't pull herself out of bed, didn't come good until about 1 o'clock after she'd had her lunch, and then she'd have a dip around 3 o'clock in her energy, and then she'd come good around dinner time, but she couldn't go to sleep. She'd have all her amazing business ideas at night. So checking in on hers, what you can see is that, especially using a graph like this, and Nutripath has a really great graph as well, is that her cortisol is under par for the first half of the day and overactive, particularly later on at night. So doing all those lifestyle kind of things to bring down that cortisol, particularly at night, doing all the nice calming meditative types of stuff in the morning, doing gentle non-competitive kind of movement, making sure that all the nutrients and cofactors for cortisol and stress and adrenals can go in, like Bs, magnesium, zinc and vitamin C, all really helpful. Because if your cortisol is high like this, if your adrenals are talking to your ovaries and your ovaries are then not doing what you'd expect them to do, then we want to make sure that they're all looked after. So the background on the pathology results, you get to, this is what your clients will get to see, and you'll get to explain it to them. So if this comes on every test, that you can see possible causes, possible treatments that you might want to think about. Of course, these are all very generalised, and you've got to take the full case to understand which ones are going to be the most pertinent treatments for these clients. But it's often a really nice thing to be able to go through with the client so that they're empowered by their numbers rather than disempowered by them. Again, her elevated testosterone, for instance, can be from ovarian or adrenal dysfunction, and when we obviously see that there's an adrenal thing with the cortisol, we obviously that there's an ovarian thing going on there as well with the history of PCOS. Excessive aromatization, so we want to make sure her liver's doing what it's supposed to do. Again, it says they're impaired phase 2 liver detoxification, so we want to make sure she's got all of the cofactors for that. Other supplements, so I also had a client who was on steroids. He was a young man who was taking steroids and wondering why he was getting pimples on his chest and on his back. And he was getting quite aggressive, and that was because he had this elevated testosterone because of exogenous supplementation. It can also be because of low hormone binding globulin, and you want to make sure that you've got someone to refer to so that you can find out if that's the case, or if FSH or LH are indicated as well, as in not ovulating. Increased stress, insulin resistance, low thyroid function and PCOS. So you can basically check through there and see if the clinical case is kind of reflective of that, and then target your treatment protocol because of it. Cool, alrighty. So these are the ideas around cortisol and DHEA. These are the stress and adrenal kind of profiles. And again, you can see it gives you all the common symptoms, and you can talk through them with your client to really hone in on what's actually happening for them. They may forget, and talking through a list like this, they may remember. And then the treatment considerations, you know, it's a great opportunity for a conversation. For instance, high cortisol at night, that treatment consideration could be something as easy as rest. Emotional, mental and physical rest, and it's actually written there. So having that on a pathology report, when people are so used to reading pathology reports and just having a number, I think is incredibly empowering, and it's a great position for us to be able to be in, to be able to deliver that information to them. Alrighty, case 2. So case 2, this lady's mid-30s, and she was coming because she was getting, in her words, turning into a psycho cow before her period. And that hadn't happened before. It had started happening for the past 3 months, and she couldn't quite understand why. She knew it was hormonal. She was getting hormonal breakouts along her jawline for 2 weeks prior to her period. And she was very short-tempered. She had... And it was extending further and further out. So at first it was a couple of days before, and then it was turning into basically the whole luteal phase, the whole 2 weeks prior. So we got her hormone profile done. She also, and things to consider in that clinical case taking, is what body shape they have, especially when it comes to estrogen dominance, if you're suspecting estrogen dominance. So this woman is a personal trainer, and I've got a lot of a lot of personal trainers that come to me, and often I find they've got very high testosterone, a lot of drive, a lot of stress, that kind of stuff. And often that's the reason why they're short-tempered. So I could have guessed that she had high testosterone. I could have guessed that her DHEA was high. I could have guessed that maybe because of her lean musculature that her progesterone was low, or I could have guessed that she was having an estrogen-like reaction only a couple of days before. But until I actually did the test, that was all guessing. It's an educated guess, but it was still guessing. So I got the test done specifically because she wanted to fall pregnant again a couple of months later. She was considering it. And I just wanted to make sure that her progesterone in particular hadn't bottomed out. So as you can see, this one's all on one page because she didn't get her cortisol done. She didn't appear to be, she isn't the type to be stressed. She does yoga and things like that. So her estrogen, as you can see, again, we don't want it to be higher than 95 in any part of the cycle, and hers is 143. Her E2, which is the general normal one, is at 10, which is great. Her E3, again, I was worried that it might be high with these hormonal breakouts that she'd been experiencing, but that was fine. Her progesterone, which is the one I was most worried about, to make sure that she could fall pregnant easily and that the ovum would stick, it is perfect at 578, so right in the middle there. And so we're not worried about all of those symptoms coming from low progesterone. And again, with the personal trainers I've had experience with in the past, we were worried about her testosterone being high. But as you can see, it's only just a little high. It's 179, but it's nothing like the vast majority that I have that are, in the 300s. And why are those two high? Well, again, so her estrogen and testosterone are a little on the high side. And is it from a high stress, and is it from that DHEA? And that's why we get the DHEA tested. It's not from that DHEA. So her testosterone and her estrogen were not being able to be detoxified as easily as we would like, and that was starting to come out in her skin. The most prevalent place for estrogen and hormone receptors, other than the hormonal tissue, the sex organs, is actually your skin. And so when we've got an excess of them, they start to come out through your skin. So it was a really good indicator as to where we needed to look. So we put her on a herb mix of peony and licorice, and we also upped her rosemary, brassicas, and cofactors for that phase 2 detoxification. And that estrogen, testosterone came down, and all her symptoms, were looked after, particularly magnesium as well, particularly for that period just before that cycle. So as you can see, it can be useful in the smallest of things, in the largest of things, and it can be useful for all sorts of different reasons, simple as PMS and as extensive as PCOS, the endometriosis, the fertility kind of clients. And when you put it together with the stress-related and the adrenal-related numbers, it can be really empowering for those people who are particularly wanting to fall pregnant, or who are particularly in pain or inflammation, to understand where they're at in the baseline, and then you can get these tested 3 to 6 months later after you've done your treatment protocol with them. So our next webinar is on adrenal hormones. So we're going to cover the cortisols, the DHEA, and even the neurotransmitters. And we're also going to, I'm going to discuss with you all the things that I do to explain to my clients how the adrenal pathways work. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. There's an epidemic of stress and stress-related disorders, and the flow-on effects and the side effects of having these high cortisols and these other kind of situations. It covers every single organ and tissue in your body when these things are out. So it's really empowering for people to see these numbers again, own them, and then own their responsibility in being able to respond, their ability to respond, their responsibility in looking after themselves. So a few people have asked me how to get involved with me being able to mentor them, and we're doing another round of group mentoring. So the group mentoring that I do, we get on a call very similar to this, but we are specifically talking about cases and business, and we do 1 hour a week, and it's a group call, so it's a similar situation, but we all get to chat and we all get to see one another, and we all get to talk about what's been happening. And I often present a case, and then it spurs on from then. We also have a private forum for other cases that might come up during the week, and it goes for 10 weeks. And you can find out more information on www.inspiremybusiness.com/mentoring. So I've got space for 5 mentorees at the moment. And if you are interested at all, I'm really excited to be able to mentor more naturopaths. I do already here in the clinic, and I've done these calls before, but I'd really like to leave it open to you guys, especially when it comes to your cases around pathology. It's second nature to me. So is business. So if there's anything you want to know about that, and we talk about all of those things in these group calls. Alrighty. Last thing, as you all know, if you need to find me, you can email me at tammy@tammyguest.com. You can also find my clinic at inspirationalhealth.com.au. If you want to learn more about the mentoring, inspiremybusiness.com/mentoring. And you can also find me on Facebook at Tammy Guest, the Entrepreneur's Naturopath. You can find me on Twitter or Periscope. If you don't know what those are, I'm happy to have a chat to you about that as well. I use social media a lot at Inspirational TG, and at Instagram I'm at Inspirational Tammy, and I pop up a lot of my day-to-day stuff there. And on Periscope I have chats around all the things that are coming up in clinic and otherwise. So thank you all for listening, and if you have learnt anything from this, please feel free to share it. I want as many people as possible to know about how easy it is to feel confident in your practice, especially around the numbers when it comes to pathology. All right, have an amazing day, and I will see you on the next webinar.